Sheets, House, and many folks throughout our region and our audience here at WNST.net. It is the official last week of the football offseason. This time next week, they will be gathering. Luke Jones will be wearing various degrees of SPF 30 and 50 on the backfields in Owings Mills as they're doing construction out there. Luke, the Ravens season can't get here fast enough with the Orioles' quick demise here in the middle of July. We're all counting down the days, and as they say, the waiting is the hardest part, right?
No doubt. As someone who really, I hate the idea of wishing the summer away, but you've watched the Orioles just like I have over the last 7-8 weeks. So certainly exciting times in terms of football. Training camp a little over a week away. And I think a really interesting season for the Baltimore Ravens, really pivotal season for the Baltimore Ravens. We've talked so much about the future of the Orioles and buying and selling, the future of Dan Duquette, the future of Buck Showalter. And to me, this season for the Ravens, it's very much a test to see, has the current regime righted the ship? Or do we continue to see things go in a direction that you don't really like? And then what does that mean in terms of what Steve Bisciotti does? So I think there's cautious optimism. I think there's still plenty of question marks, but starting next week in Owings Mills, we start to get more of an idea of what the 2017 Ravens are going to look like. I think there's still a move or two to be made. Certainly the offensive line, we've talked about that at length, and we will continue to talk about that.
That is the story, right? That's where we pick this thing up. It's who's going to be on the field. There aren't a lot of positions up for grabs. Maybe on the defense, just, how deep they'll go, 14, 15, 16, how they rotate the lines, which sub-packages they'll use in nickel and in dime. Sure. I mean, all that's, you'll be talking about that, but primarily the offensive line is where the conversation's going to be the first 2 or 3 weeks for sure, right?
I think it has to be. I mean, we can talk about tight end, and certainly with Darren Waller's suspension, that's further clouded that position. Not that he was a slam dunk to start, but I think everyone looked at his athleticism and thought, okay, if there's someone that really has upside in the group, he seemed to be it. Well, now he's suspended for the next year, and you wonder about his future with the Ravens or with anyone at this point. Sure. But we talked about tight end. I think wide receiver, as much as you might say, okay, how good is that wide receiver group? And certainly Jeremy Maclin's addition is huge. There's debate there, but I think it's pretty clear-cut what it's going to look like, barring injuries. I think we know who the top three is going to be. Chris Moore as the number 4 receiver, and then you kind of see what the Michael Campaneros and the Keenan Reynolds of the group, how they battle it out to try to nail down that number 5 spot, let's say. But the offensive line, I mean, you're talking about 2 positions right now where there's a lot of question. I mean, we saw 3 different options, Ryan Jensen, John Urschel, and Matt Skura, work as the first-team center over OTAs and minicamp. And right tackle now, we saw James Hurst there almost exclusively, but it's James Hurst, and we've seen him struggle as much as he has over his first few years. Now, I think,
but guys do get better. I always point that out. They do.
They do. But the bar was pretty low those first couple years.
Fair enough.
I mean, let's. I mean,
well, it was high enough to get him on the field to start with, though, right?
Yeah, sure. But I think the one undersold, overlooked aspect of the whole offensive line equation is the addition of Greg Roman. And from a schematic standpoint, they are going to be different. I think you're going to see more manpower. You're going to see more downhill, whereas it was more the lateral movement in Juan Castillo's zone blocking schemes. Not that they didn't run any man blocking, but a little bit different stylistically. So I think that's something that you keep in the back of your mind, but you still look at those options at center. You still look at those options at right tackle, and I think you'd be kidding yourself if there isn't some concern there, if there isn't some trepidation there. As much as we talk so much, and the team talked so much at the end of 2016 about doing everything they could to get Joe Flacco playing at a higher level, it begins and ends with the offensive line. I mean, you can have great targets, you can have a talented running back, but one, if you're not opening running lanes, and 2, more importantly for Joe Flacco's well-being, if you're not protecting him, everything else becomes a moot point. Forget about skill position players if you can't protect your quarterback and you can't run the football when you want to. So that's going to be the big story. I think it's still to be determined as far as making an addition, whether it's a Mangold or whoever they might bring in at either of those positions, or what moves they might have to make from a cap standpoint to get that done. But I think that's got to be something that everyone is paying close attention to. Media out in training camp, but certainly during the preseason, you want to see Joe Flacco upright, and you want to see this team be able to run the football. And Greg Roman's going to be a big part of that. But the one thing, as I pointed out in what I wrote at WNST.net late last week, keep in mind, Greg Roman had Frank Gore in San Francisco, Pro Bowl running back, and he had Shady McCoy in Buffalo. So the Ravens don't have that standout home run hitter. Maybe Kenneth Dixon can be that guy after the first 4 games when he's suspended. But Terrence West, I think, is capable, but you certainly don't look at him as 2000-level Jamal Lewis by any stretch. So they got to be able to block. They need to be able to open running lanes. Running backs need to be able to take advantage of that. But I think Greg Roman can really cement his reputation as a running game guru, genius, whatever you want to call him, if he's able to get this team's ground attack on track, because they need that. They cannot continue to go down the road that they have the last couple of years with Joe Flacco throwing 600 times. I mean, it's not what's best for him. It's not what's best for the Ravens. But in order to do that, you have to be able to run the football effectively. So that offensive line, Greg Roman, what the changes that he's going to make from a scheme standpoint, that's going to be under the microscope. Has been already this spring, will continue to be as they get into the summer.
He is Luke Jones. He will be on the scene in Owings Mills beginning next week, but is with the Orioles this week. And, of course, if there's any breaking news on either side of the fence, you'll get that first on the WNST text service. That is all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday, and no one more excited about football getting going than Dennis, but maybe it's our own coach, our ball coach around here, Brian Billick, on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation, who is going to be moonlighting here and doing a little bit of WBAL work and doing some television work in the preseason. And, I don't want to say, look, I'm very biased about Coach Billick. I think everybody here knows that about me and my relationship with Coach. But this is a great thing, I think, for Ravens fans. And, look, I mean, the preseason is the preseason. I mean,
sure,
it can only be that good or that much, but it is a familiar voice. I think it's a guy that a lot of folks wondered if he would ever be back in any sort of official capacity wearing anything purple. I think some of the ice is thawed for sure. And, of course, you were on stage with Coach Billick and Coach Harbaugh and know of their relationship being pretty sterling, by the by. And, and I think the screaming begins anew about Brian Billick in the Ring of Honor, right?
No doubt. It's something that is overdue at this point. I understood you weren't going to put him in the Ring of Honor in 2008. I don't think Coach Billick would have really wanted to come back the following season to be put in the Ring of Honor, but nearly a decade has passed. To me, there should be no awkwardness on Steve Bisciotti's part at this point. I mean, Brian Billick 2 years ago, if you recall, when he was there with NFL Network, spoke to the Ravens' current players after practice. John Harbaugh invited him to do that. I thought that, to me, was really kind of the ice melting, so to speak, as far as the idea of Billick being in the Ring of Honor, and certainly with him being part of the preseason broadcast team. And he's good at the job, too. He's certainly, anyone who's seen his work previously on Fox, certainly we've seen him on NFL Network for a number of years now on their various shows. He does a good job. So I think it'll be good for preseason broadcasts, making them somewhat watchable, maybe. That's no knock on any of the broadcasters. It's preseason football. But I think to me, this just feels like the latest, maybe the last step in him being part of the Ring of Honor. It's time. John Harbaugh will join him in the Ring of Honor at some point. So there should be no awkwardness there. 9 years have passed. I mean, it's been...
We've had a couple of pretty good coaches around here, right?
Yeah. It'll be 10 years in January since the change was made. So I mean, it's time. There's no... I've seen a couple things this week of people saying he doesn't belong. I don't get that. I mean, short of...
Yeah, you weren't paying attention around here. That's all. All I can say. You didn't read Purple Rain 1.
Look, Brian would be the first to tell you that Kyle Bowler and his inability to develop a franchise quarterback did him in the end. He understands that. It's not to say he was perfect, but any head coach who wins a Super Bowl, I mean, unless your standard's going to be that you're only going to put Hall of Fame players in the Ring of Honor, and we know that's not the case, I would say if Brian Billick's not welcome or isn't deserving of the Ring of Honor, then I would say there are individuals in the Ring of Honor right now, not just Ernest Miner, mind you, that don't belong in there. That to me is how simple this should be. Whether it happens this year, next year, whenever it is, it needs to happen sooner rather than later, and I think it will at this point. I think you're seeing that fall, as you mentioned. It's very much there. I don't think there's animosity. I mean, maybe there's deep down a little bit between Steve Bisciotti and Billick, but at the same time,
well, there still is between Dilfer and Ozzie and Brian, on down the line, right? I mean, literally.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there are big egos at work in the NFL. I mean, that's not a bad thing. That's just reality. So even if there is a little bit of that lingers, there's no reason why Brian Billick shouldn't receive his just due being in the Ring of Honor, and I think we're going to see it. Maybe not this year, but you have to think it's coming. I just don't see any reason why you would keep him out.
Football season's getting here when on Sunday night Justin Tucker is tweeting, "I'll be at Patterson Park tomorrow kicking. Who's coming?" Where guys are getting itchy, right? I mean, there's a little bit of that, and guys running around doing the vacation thing. And if you follow any of these guys on Facebook or Twitter, you know where some of them are and where some others aren't. But we all know that they'll be coming together next week, and this is sort of the end of the summer blues for a lot of the players, and certainly for you who will be out there spending a lot of time, and the fans don't have access. So it is a little bit different, and I think a lot of fans will be living off of some of the access that the players tweet out, that the team tweets out, that the media tweets out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like I said, this is a very pivotal season for John Harbaugh. I think, probably to a lesser degree, but Ozzie Newsome in the front office. I mean, I think it's pivotal for Joe Flacco. One thing that I said and what I wrote at WNST.net, my 12 Ravens thoughts counting down to training camp was, look, we know Joe's contract makes him, even if you wanted to entertain the thought of an exit strategy, next 2 years, from a cap standpoint, it's a non-starter. I mean, you're not even going to talk about it. But hypothetically speaking, let's just say for argument's sake, Joe Flacco and the offense has a bad year. The Ravens have a bad year. John Harbaugh is dismissed. Whether you agree with that or not, let's say that happens.
You're going like total nuclear. It's not out of the question, but that's nuclear.
It's not out of the question. And my point being, is a new head coach coming in here going to be as invested long-term in a 33-year-old quarterback with the cap number and with, let's face it, hasn't had
well, he would be contributing to Harbaugh's getting fired. You mentioned
right, and that's
Bowler earlier, right?
I mean, that's my whole thing. All these guys are invested in each other, and look, I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying that's how important this season is. I mean, if things,
it's all connected, right?
Yeah,
I agree with that.
If things go off the rails and they go 6-10 or 5-11, and John Harbaugh loses his job, then that's not to say Flacco's benched in 2018. I'm not saying that at all.
By the way, it's a real tribute to Ozzie that they've never rebuilt here, right? I mean, they've always sort of reloaded and thought we can win 10 or 11 games this year, and they feel that way now. I mean, whether you or I feel that way, that's fine, but they rarely this time of the year feel like they can't win 10 or 11 games. They've never had that year where they're just going to stink. I mean, and that's a tribute, I think, to all of them, quite frankly, and to what to where they are. Because as you and I sit around here talking about a Ravens season that might be 6-10 or come off the rails, but probably will look like 8 or 9 or 10 wins, probably, kind of, sort of, given the all of this. And we're talking about the Orioles. Like, when will they be good again? When will we think they're going to win 90 games again? It really does speak to the consistency of this team.
Well, it does, and they're different sports too. I mean, but
we don't spend a lot of time talking about John Harbaugh getting fired around here. We don't.
No, but we could.
Yeah, one in 3 would get that party started.
Sure. I mean, that would certainly become. But getting back to what you said, I mean, 2002 expectations were low, and I think they would even privately would have told you that the fact that they went 7-9. I've long contended that might have been Brian Billick's best coaching job that year for that team. When you looked at how incredibly young they were. 2008, expectations weren't high. I mean, they weren't planning to start Joe Flacco at quarterback. I mean, he wouldn't have had Troy Smith not. So they've had a couple years here and there, but yeah, they've been consistent. But that's a tribute to the organization. That's why, even someone like me who has been critical of the way that they've done some things over the last, really post Super Bowl 47. I've also been quick to point out, hey, there's a really high standard here. So when things don't go well, that doesn't mean you throw out the baby with the bathwater immediately. I think they're entitled to some time. I think Steve Bisciotti has afforded them that time. But missing the playoffs once again for the fourth time in 5 years since Super Bowl 47, that's becoming a harder and harder sell not to make some changes. So it just speaks to how pivotal this year is. I think they're expecting their defense to be great. They're certainly going to be counting on some young, unproven players at some spots to help make that group great. And offensively, I think there's a little more question there. I don't think anyone should be expecting that offense to be great, but can it be good enough? And if you have a great defense and a solid offense, that's usually a formula that can get you into the playoffs. But if the defense is only, say, good and the offense is bad, well, then you might be looking at really trying to really force the issue to try to get to 9 or 10 wins. So it'll certainly be interesting, but so our curiosity will be satisfied, at least in part, starting next week and then as we get into the preseason.
All right, Luke is resting up by watching Oriole baseball, which means long nights and bad pitching. There'll be plenty of that this week with the Texas Rangers as well as the Houston Astros. You can find him, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter as well. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. The Peter Principles coming next week, chapters 9, 10, and 11, as well as the audio version. You will hear that here next week on WNST.net and AM 1570. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and, of course, our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month, still the best deal in town, and they'll still get you in shape for what's left of bikini season. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.